interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom window. If you click on the globe icon, you're able to select English or French channels. And on the French channel, our interpreter Darcy will be translating the presentation from English to French. And as you can see from the first slide here, the presentation is in both English and French. So welcome to the third webinar of the Integrating the Truth and Reconciliation Commission Calls to Action in Nursing Education workshop series. The Canadian Institute of Health Research Indigenous Health Research Chairs in Nursing have co-designed and are co-delivering this 5-part series to support anti-racist and decolonial practices in nursing education as a collective response to implementing the TRC Calls to Action. I'd like to go through a few housekeeping items before today's presentation begins. Due to the large number of participants, you will all be on mute for the duration of the session. You are welcome to use the chat function to interact with others during the presentation, or contact any of us that have CASN in our names if you're having technical issues. You will be invited to interact with the presenters and your fellow attendees through discussion questions using Mentimeter. So we will be providing a link and QR code on certain slides so that you can access our poll questions during the presentation. The presentation will conclude with an opportunity for questions using the Q&A function in Zoom. So there's a little button at the bottom of your screen and you can type your questions in there. And I encourage you to hold those questions until the end of the presentation. Finally, as I mentioned at the start, I want to repeat for anyone that has just joined us that you're able to listen to the presentation in French by clicking on the interpretation button and then picking the French channel. And today's presentation will be recorded and shared within the next few days. And I will now turn things over to my colleague Lois to introduce the presentation and today's speakers.
Hello, everyone. Today we'll be hearing from Elder Ann, Dr. Mona Lisa Bork-Burskin, and Dr. Margot Latimer. We'll also get to hear students and nurses' perspective from Don Gugu, Christina Takanyuka, Michelle Padley, and Julie Francis on the topic of cultural safety. In Canada, we live, learn, and work on traditional Indigenous territories. We pay our respects to the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit ancestors and affirm our commitment to respectful relationships with one another on this land. Here in Montreal, I'm situated on the land of the Mohawks, part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and Anishinaabe Nations. I would like to honor the diverse Indigenous peoples connected to this territory in which I gather today. This webinar will be focused on sharing lived experiences to promote critical thinking in relation to Indigenous-specific cultural safety in nursing education, practice, policy, and research. We'll discuss key assumptions and theoretical foundations of cultural safety, like how colonizing historical events continue to uphold systemic racism and the impacts on Indigenous peoples' relationship with educational institutions, healthcare providers, and systems. The goal is to...
Hello.
Welcome, Elder Ann.
Oh my gosh, I got on. Okay, just a minute here. Can you see me?
Not yet.
Okay, let's
Lois
see.
is going to introduce you, Ann, in just a couple minutes.
We can see you now, Ann.
Okay. The goal is to transform teaching and learning through being accountable, responsive, and respectful of distinct rights of Indigenous peoples in the colonial context of nursing education. I now invite you to use the link on this slide to locate yourselves and share in the chat box where you are. Please welcome Elder Ann as she now opens this workshop up for us. Off to you, Elder Ann.
Oh my goodness, Wilalian. Thank you, my dear. So you're able to see me and hear me okay? Yes? Okay, wonderful. Well, I just want to say hello to everyone and what an honor it is I think it's going to be a full moon because the energy is very, very quick lately, and there's something going on in the universe. Um, so I won't take up too much of your time. What I would like to do, as I truly believe this is what my ancestors did when they started anything in their life, their daily life, and how they connected to the universe, to creation, everything that was placed on Mother Earth, they connected with it. And the only way they did that was by sitting in silence for a moment. And they would allow themselves to just be and to feel the energy of everything that breathed with them. With every breath they took, everything breathed with them also. And it's something that we've forgotten how to do because it's so busy. We think we're not doing anything if we take a moment to just be, but we're actually doing the most important thing for ourselves, honoring our creator for creating us, honoring the fact that we have this breath that's been given to us, and so we don't breathe on our own. Someone far greater than us gives us our breath every moment, and this is how special we are to be able to have this. So I'm going to ask everyone to just take a moment. We're going to probably do maybe the longest I'll have you sitting in silence with yourself is maybe about 30 seconds or 60, maybe a minute. We'll see. And just close your eyes, and whether you're standing or sitting, wherever you are, to just meet your breath by taking a breath in through your nostrils and then releasing it through your nostrils in a very natural way, the best that you can. So let's try that. Let's meet our breath. Take a breath in and allow the breath to come out. Take a breath in and feel it go out. Take a breath in and release it, and let your shoulders fall when you release this breath. Let them just melt. Feel your muscles just melt, and just continue breathing. Find your own rhythm of breathing, and let your shoulders relax every time you let your breath out for a few minutes. This breath in and this breath out. This breath in and this breath out. And just sit and be for a few minutes. I always say when we allow ourselves to sit in the moment, we're allowing our mind, body, and spirit to be in the best possible space and to do exactly the very best what it's supposed to do. Our mind works constantly to keep us alive. Our physical being heals itself without even us even thinking about it. And our spirit is always there to remind us to believe, to be grateful, to think those well thoughts. So with all the rushing to get here, all the planning that you've all been doing to make this happen, just allow it to all just be. And if your thoughts are still planning and still wondering about time, As soon as you know that you're thinking, well, you take that thought and put it on a cloud and just let that cloud drift away. And you say to yourself, come back to my breath. I don't need that right now. I know what I'm doing. I know what that thought is. Either I'm planning, remembering, being upset, or whatever it is that you might be thinking about. You don't need it in this moment, not this moment. So let it drift off. I don't need you right now. Come back to my breath. This breath in and this breath out. Just sit and be as you sit with the one who created all and gives you your breath. O great spirit, whose voice I hear in the wind, whose breath gives life to all, hear me, for I am young, small, and weak. I need your strength, O great one. Take my hands so that I may learn to respect the beautiful things you have created, including myself. Take my feet and be my guide with my footsteps so that I can walk the path of wellness, the path of honesty, forgiveness, compassion, understanding, resilience, abundance, wisdom, and peace. Help me to conquer the greatest enemy, myself, and help me to learn the lessons you have placed in every leaf and rock, so that I can learn these teachings and bring them back to the people. So that when our eyes fade like the setting sun, my spirit can come to you without shame. Tahoe, that's a prayer that was made by Black Elk many years ago. And now you can slowly open your eyes and bring yourself back into the moment, wherever you are. And as you open your eyes, you'll feel that energy, just be able to be alive, to be well. I say we're like the trees, you know, we need to be able to give thanks all the time for everything that we have and for this breath, so that we can do the very best that we can do by taking care of ourselves. So I want to say Walalian and Walaliok, and have a wonderful meeting, and I will probably see you later.
Thank you so much, Elder Ann. Now I invite the nurses to introduce themselves.
I can go first, Julie. I don't know if you're there. My name is Dawn Gugu. I'm from Wagaba First Nation in Inamagi, which is Cape Breton in Nova Scotia. And I am home this evening. I just got here, so I'm really happy to be home and can't wait to be with my sister. So I work with the Chair of Indigenous Health Research as the lead of the UNO Nursing Initiative that supports Indigenous nursing students at Dalhousie.
Hi, everybody. My name is Julie Francis. I'm a Mi'kmaq registered nurse from Eskasoni. My dad's family was from Waikagama First Nation, and my mom's side of the family was from Bodlodek or Chapel Island First Nation. And they were all moved to their homes during centralization in Eskasoni. So now we're all Eskasoni residents. and it's a good place. I love my community. I graduated from St. FX in 2010 and started working at the Eskasoni Health Center as a community health nurse. I've also been doing research with the IWKS Center for Pediatric Pain Research and the Aboriginal Children's Hurt and Healing Initiative since 2011. And last month I graduated from Dalhousie with a Master of Science in Nursing. Me and Dawn, we graduated together. Dawn graduated with a Master of Nursing. And I believe we were the only two nurses to walk across the stage in the graduate nursing category. And, you know, just two Indigenous nurses, no big deal. And I've been with Dawn since we were at St. FX. So it was really, really powerful to be able to graduate with Dawn. And I'm so grateful that the work we do keeps bringing us together. And now I'm chair of Ill New Health at Cape Breton University.
Thanks, Julie.
Tasha Kioao, Michelle Padley, Dishinakishan, Secwepemc Mulu Nuikin on the unceded and traditional territories of the Secwepemc peoples. I'm very happy to be here today. I am a Métis nurse and a recent graduate of the Master of Nursing program at Thompson Rivers University in what is colloquially known as Kamloops, British Columbia. I am now in the role of Provincial Programs Manager for the Ministry of Mental Health and Harm Reduction at Métis Nation, BC, and I continue my work alongside the BC Indigenous Health Nursing Research Chair as well. I'll pass it over to Christina. Merci.
Merci, Michelle, Tensei, and Tawau, everybody. My name is Christina Chakanuka. I'm a Métis nurse and an educator and a researcher. I really do situate myself and the knowledge that I hold. It doesn't really come from me as some self-important person, but rather it comes from where I grew up and where my family is from and to whom I am connected. So I grew up on Dene Cree and Métis homelands in a rural remote community called Fort Smith, Northwest Territories. I had the privilege of connecting with the land and the water and my Indigenous roots in ways that shaped my sense of belonging as a Métis woman from a young age. On my mom's side, I'm related to the Villebrin, Gladue, and Evans families. And on my father's side, 9th generation Scottish Shetler, MacDonald families. I'm really passionate about co-creating culturally secure and safe space and places for Indigenous nurses, as well as Indigenous community members and our families to thrive rather than survive in healthcare. So just thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm thankful to Dr. Lisa Burke-Bereskin for taking me under her wing. I'm currently a PhD candidate at U of Vic, joining from Coast Salish homelands. Thank you. Merci.
Miyoki Spell. Good day, everyone. Lisa Burke-Bereskin, Nasiga Sun, Amasquasagiagan, Equa Ochi Nia. Good morning, everyone. It's a good day today, and I want to welcome you all to our session. I'm originally from Amasquasagiagan, which is also known as Beaver Lake Cree Nation, in Treaty 6 territory, northern Northeast Alberta. And I'm coming to you today on the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam people. And I'm currently living and working on the unceded and traditional territories of the Songhees and the Wasanich people. And so today, the diversity that we bring, and thank you so much for starting us in this safe and inviting way to nourish each of our spirits in a way that is, you know, I think it exemplifies a culturally safe practice. And utmost importance today, I want to acknowledge one of my mentors, Sister Veronica from Akwesasne, is making her journey over to the other side. And what a fierce leader. And I hope someone wrote her story. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Margot Latimer, and I am the chair of Indigenous Health Nursing for Nova Scotia. I want to acknowledge that I live and I'm very grateful to be living in the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq. And I'm a pediatric nurse from, I guess I graduated in 1989, and I've always had a connection with Mi'kmaq people. I grew up in an adjacent town to a community here, a large community here in Nova Scotia, and about 20 minutes also from the residential school here in Nova Scotia. However, when I was growing up, I really didn't understand what that meant. I really didn't know much about the Mi'kmaq. And even through my post-secondary education, I didn't get a lot of education about who Mi'kmaq and Indigenous people were. And it's only been as an adult and through my graduate work and now my work as a nurse and researcher that I've learned about that history, that accurate history, the impact of that history. And so that history has really situated me as a settler Canadian with Scottish ancestry and who I am and what it is that I feel my role is with this work in supporting and using my skills and knowledge as a researcher, as a pediatric nurse in service to Mi'kmaq and other Indigenous people. And so I have been working for the last 15 years to support Mi'kmaq and other Indigenous people to mobilize their knowledge and perspectives and better access to care and now education. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. I also want to say how humbled I am to be here today with these incredible Métis and First Nation and Mi'kmaq nurses, as well as I'm really grateful for Ann for starting us off and joining us today. So it's really quite an honor to be part of this. I think there we go. So we wanted to start by just having you all reflect on your understanding of the components of cultural safety. That's really what it is we're talking about today and how we can think about that within our schools of nursing and educational settings. So how would you don't have to rate it right now, but we're just trying to get you to think about it in a more objective way. How would you rate your knowledge of implementing the components into your school of nursing in relation to the local Indigenous people? So we shared the map, which is incredibly helpful, I find, because you can go on it and find where you're located, as well as the treaties of the Indigenous people where you're located, and also the language. So it's really helpful to know who are the Indigenous people in the area where you're living. How do you interact with that knowledge, and what is your understanding of how you could interact with that? How would you rate your knowledge of the CASN educational framework to address the TRC calls to action? And what is your ability to respond to that? So we're going to talk a little bit more about what that framework is. So the calls to action 24 is about implementing an Indigenous health course that deals with the history and legacy of residential schools, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties, and Indigenous teachings and practices. So this requires skill-based training in all of these areas and understanding conflict resolution, human rights, anti-racism. So we're really being called on as nurse educators to implement a course. So we start to think about, well, how would we do that? So that's what we're talking about today, is asking you to reflect on how you might be thinking about doing that. Call to action 22 calls us to, for those who can affect change within the healthcare system, to recognize the value of Aboriginal healing practices and use them in the treatment for Indigenous people in collaboration with healers and elders when requested by Indigenous people. And so in order to be able to recognize that value, we need to know something about that. So how do we go about understanding that within our schools? Call to action number 23 is related to increasing the number of Indigenous professionals working in the healthcare field. So of course, our focus is around nurses, and to ensure that retention within our healthcare settings. And also to provide cultural, what we call safety rather than competency training for all healthcare professionals. So this is quite a comprehensive call. We're all working on this in different areas. So we're looking forward to some of your feedback of how you've been thinking about that as well. So why is cultural safety important? So we've laid out some of the groundwork here specific to those calls to action. Cultural safety really confronts the structural racism that's rooted in our colonial systems and our policies in education and in health systems. We know that there's unequal access to power and resources by Indigenous people and their knowledge within our education systems and our healthcare systems. So it's logical that these two systems are connected because we're preparing the next generation of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to be nurses. But what are the systems that help facilitate that and recognize and honor those knowledges? We also know that delaying or avoiding access to education or healthcare is directly related to racism. And we know that stigmatization, stereotyping, discrimination can impact access to healthcare, decision to seek healthcare, but also decisions to apply to university and come into our nursing programs. So we're really trying to help you see how these concepts are connected for Indigenous people based on the structural racism that exists within the systems. We know racism exists because there have been too many high-profile cases where Indigenous people have died as a result of the structural racism that exists within our healthcare system. There are examples right across the country that happen in every province and every region. We know, again, that these have been investigated and that there have been plans now made as a result of these investigations to move forward with the solutions that need to be intergenerational and interdisciplinary, interprofessional. We know that we need Indigenous-specific anti-racism education and cultural safety within both nursing education and healthcare. So from an Indigenous perspective, we want to think about strengths-based approaches, and Indigenous people have helped me. They've mentored me and helped me think about how we teach from a deficit base, but we really need to be thinking about from a strengths-based. So we do have to acknowledge, though, the truth before the reconciliation. So some of these, the structural racism over time, these colonizing policies, such as the residential school, the Indian Act, have created this unfortunate situation where Indigenous people have difficulty accessing the determinants of health and through education, through employment, which has resulted in a shift in health and challenges related to substance use and racism. So the tree, as you saw, just is a depiction of that in terms of how colonization has has created this situation for us today, this ongoing situation of how racism continues within both education and the healthcare system. And so what we're trying to do through the calls to action, mobilizing those calls to action, is creating opportunities using the strengths of Indigenous people, using Indigenous knowledges related to health and healing, and creating access to the opportunities of nursing education, nursing practice opportunities, policy, and research, and undoing some of those harms and that racism of the past. So I'm going to pass it over to Lisa.
Lisa, you're muted.
Thank you. I thought I clicked it. Thank you, Margot. I just picking up where Margot sort of, oh, sorry, I gotta get rid of this thing on my computer. Picking up where back to the picture with the tree on it, as she showed us, if you think about that model of how we've delivered healthcare services to Indigenous people in Canada, we've started at the top. We focused on smoking habits. We focused on behaviors. And then, coming into, the early 2000s, 2000, we started really looking at the middle piece, right? What was happening in the systems, that there wasn't this clear pathway to really addressing Indigenous sovereignty, treaty rights, and racism. And so where we are now currently in, when we look at healthcare in Canada, and even how we teach, is really at the roots of what Margot had pointed out about colonization, racism. And that's the really hard work that we're in right now. And just the importance of Anne starting us off in that way really exemplifies to always take that moment to recognize that we're all in relationship to each other. So what I breathe out, or by the energy that I exert, it is absorbed by participants, even the energy that I exert through the videos, the Zoom conferences, when I stand up in front of my classrooms and I talk about racism. It's not an easy conversation to do. And so we just really ask our allies to really, think about how hard truth telling is and being vulnerable. So cultural safety is really at the crux of the work that we need to do. And so I'm always reminded by my Cree knowledge holders that I'm always in constant relationship. And so, taking those moments for breath, really recognize that we are part of something bigger, something that we often don't see. We can't see the future, but have comfort in knowing that we are moving through a system where the intention was to kill the Indian in the child. And it is living out the same way in current context in how we see child welfare, our justice system, and how that intersects in our healthcare system. And the impact that has on Indigenous nurses. You recognized here that these strong Indigenous nursing graduate students have been stellar in situating themselves. And it's not just about recognizing your indigeneity. It's about the connection and the commitment and the responsibilities that we hold, both as non-Indigenous and Indigenous people to this country, of really trying to help make that change. And so on to the next slide. Really want to, just as I just recognized Sister Veronica, in terms of really, I remember in the early days of our nursing in, conference organizations with Canadian Indigenous Nursing Association, she was one of the key members to really bring us together and train us and encourage us to speak our truth and to not believe what we were reading in the textbooks. Up until 5 years ago, there are really very, very limited resources about seeing ourselves in nursing and how that looks. And so the foundation of cultural safety is so important, that all educators really have a firm grounding on the difference between cultural safety and cultural competency. And Iraparti Ramsdid was a Maori nurse, and because of the racism and the discrimination and the impact of colonization with the Maori people, this is the first Indigenous nursing philosophy and framework that really gave us that space and opportunity to think and accept our own responsibilities and truths, and and really showed us that we deserve more, right? We have something very important to contribute, and not to just nursing. When we think about cultural safety, it is rooted in a rights framework, and it's about recognizing the rights of the other, and it requires us to really all take a hard look at the power we hold, and how do we neutralize that power so that Indigenous nurses have that space and that safety to speak their truth without being humiliated or alienated. And we do that in such insidious ways through one word that we use, through the eye look, through the body work. And so cultural, next slide. Again, just reiterating the importance of understanding how we even came to this continuum of cultural safety. And it comes from, anthropology. In the early days of Madeline Leninger really brought that cultural perspective in. But again, it was looking at the individual as other. And so over the years, we've seen this change in thinking in terms of, cultural safety, cultural sensitivity, cultural competency. This continuum really shows how we've progressed as nurses, and how we're starting to reclaim our own knowledge, our own understandings of how we address culture, and looking at the culture now of nursing practice in general. And so on to the next slide. And I mentioned, the early terms, and we all remember them. I treat everybody the same, right? That's cultural blindness, right? That shows us there's really a lack of understanding about awareness when we use that terms. We treat everybody the same, because you're pretty much creating an unsafe environment, not recognizing the impact of colonialism on. And again, this is all within an Indigenous population that we talk from, but you can easily apply these principles. And the foundation of understanding cultural safety is being aware and having that own sensitivity. And the own sensitivity is just an understanding or a feeling that something's impact you in a way. And right now, what's just dominating nursing and medical education, healthcare delivery, is cultural competence. This is a very Eurocentric construct in terms of it's a way to manage our standards of practice. It's a way to create check marks to say, I've done this, I have knowledge, I understand that I'm on, someone else's land. I know the names, I can say hello in their language. And again, those, cultural competency creates this checkbox system that, allows us to performative benevolence, right? And so as nurses, we want to do good. And so all of our standards of practice, our APARs, when we have to do our yearly evaluations, is exactly on this measurement of cultural competency, of knowledge, awareness, and skill. And so really encouraging you guys to really think beyond that. And if you're going to apply that, think about how that is applied at that root level. What are you doing to create these conversations of colonization? Have you understood your own implicit bias and how that impacts your ability to teach about Indigenous people? On to the next slide. And so again, this is more of a comparative between cultural safety and competency. And so, understanding this ontological, this state of being, and how knowledge is developed is so important when we're trying to look and unpack some of these conversations. And I'd mentioned, in nursing, we really seen the concept of culture come through transcultural. There's so many different models. Again, that is grounded, but it's from an outsider perspective. Whereas cultural safety, it's rooted in the students or the clients we serve. And it's grounded in social constructivism, recognizing that we've socially constructed people into certain racial categories. So if you're aligning your practice along with cultural safety, competency, you can see that the theoretical foundation of that is essentialism. And some of the current research coming out of nursing shows that nursing is really struggling with moving away from essentialism. Really, it's that hard journey inwards that, Anne kind of alluded to at the beginning. So on to the next slide. So this one kind of compares between our roles as nurses. So, and again, cultural safety is really looking at yourself as the other. The nurse is the other, the educator is the other. And so when I walk into classrooms, I recognize my own lack of understanding. Even, when I think about, the 250 some diverse First Nations just here in British Columbia, and that doesn't include our Métis populations, right? And so bringing that diversity and that distinct features on what we really need to, take a very close look at on how we talk about and educate people on other people. And one of the most important pieces of this is understanding power. We have power over, we have power with, we talk about empowerment. And even when we talk about empowering, we're still coming from a place that that cultural competency is that we have the ability to actually empower somebody. And if you really think about that from an inward individual perspective, the power only lies with us. We only have the power to truly empower ourselves to create that courage to speak. But what we can do is we can neutralize power dynamics. We could, do things like, instead of standing up in front of a classroom, sit in a circle with your, neutralize all the power when we think about those power dynamics with guest lectures and keynote presentations and all of that we do. And so just a little bit about the principles. Again, really cultural safety allows us to embrace this idea of difference. It doesn't recognize us as same, right? It addresses those gross inequities that we see in this country and the continued genocide of our knowledge systems. Now that we're all talking about integrating, knowledge holders and creating partnerships, we have to do that in a way that is meaningful. It's not just bringing in an elder to do opening prayer and paying them $500, because that's causing more harm. That's more along the side of cultural competency, because we're just, we've said the land acknowledgement, we've worked with the elder. So, we've kind of just really touched on the surface of these set of theoretical foundations of cultural safety. But what's one more characteristic I just wanted to share before I move over is the next slide on understanding the difference between reflexivity and reflection. Cultural safety is reflexivity means that we are questioning our own biases and assumptions. We're asking ourselves, where did that come from? Why did I say that? Why am I using this language? And when we use, one of the things that I was even questioning myself on is, using the word reserve. Why am I using that? That's a colonial term that reinforces this ideology that Indigenous peoples are wards of the court. And that's really what our Constitution says is, when we self-identify is that, we are So it's much deeper, and that's the hard work. And how do we measure? How do we critique our students' ability to use reflexive thinking? And so again, it's all about why did I think like that? Why do I think all Indigenous people are disadvantaged? Why is there greater cancer rates in First Nations communities? It's all of those why, and where did those ideologies and thoughts come from? And so just on to the next slide. And so just to be really critical of our term, I think it really is not enough for us to use it as a standalone approach. I did mention that it's really based on this ideology of multiculturalism, which promotes cultural and harmonizing, but that's kind of like a melting pot. That really does a disservice to our First Nations, Inuit, and Métis populations in Canada, because multiculturalism tries to erode that. It tries to neutralize those sovereign Indigenous rights. So as allies, as Indigenous people, we always have to situate. That's why it's so important for land acknowledgement, because land acknowledgement is about land back. And so how do we give back? What is our responsibilities as nurses to support people on claiming their own identity, claiming their own language? How do we help people in nursing education, even translate some of our nursing pamphlets and information into our own Indigenous languages? And on to the next slide. I realize and so, yes, so I think really cultural safety, it really can help us move beyond, this performative benevolence that nursing is married to. It's not easy work. And, I have many conversations with my allies and myself and my students on how do we stay strong? How do we keep this armor on so that we're not embodying this? Because as Indigenous people, having that relational paradigm, practicing in that relational way, requires us to exert a lot more energy and thoughtfulness around how do we support sovereignty? How do we develop our own Indigenous philosophies to support the clients we're working at? And then on to the next slide. I think it's really important that we recognize, cultural safety is not a new term in Canada. The Canadian Indigenous Nursing Association has been advocating for culturally safe education now for, you'll see there 2019, we're into a decade in this. And, they've been really instrumental in moving this forward. So a lot of the nursing webinars and the SANIUS projects, programs, we see a lot more movement. And so I always like to give credit where credit is due. And the fact that CASN and CNA and the Canadian nurses came together on this collaboration really articulated these core competencies. So if people haven't seen this document, when people ask, what can I do? Go to these documents and it tells you what you can do there. And the last one was the most recent one where I think Margot alluded to, and we'll cover a little bit more of that, is the work of the cultural competency and cultural safety framework. And so this work, I know it says cultural competency, but that's where you kind of have to find your pathway. And I don't think this document does a service by focusing on cultural competency, but I think they've got some really great ideas on how we as educators can start really looking and doing a better job at how we incorporate and neutralize these power dynamics and recognize Indigenous sovereignty as central to the work that we do moving forward within our Indigenous populations. And so we just wanted a quick question. Oh, and you've done it already. Okay, perfect. How would you rate your understanding of components of cultural safety? So if you would like to, I think you're putting it up there, CASN, for people to incorporate, or did I miss that already? We just had one response.
That was our testing response. So please go ahead and join at menti.com. The code is on the screen.
Okay. So I see we have some people, right? And that's good. Thank you for sharing that. You know, and cultural safety too, it's goes along with, you know, we see in British Columbia, they have adopted the cultural safety and cultural humility framework, because you can't be cultural safe if you don't have humility. And having humility really is at the crux of the work that we do as nurses, is understanding that the patient and the student often know more than we do when it comes to their own learning or their own care. And so how do we create that space and time as educators to really respond to the students in a culturally safe way, where they, you know, have the opportunities to challenge the literature, that they have the opportunities to speak their truth in a way that they're not receiving pushback or denial, recognizing the importance of white supremacy as the foundation of this healthcare system. It's the foundation of academia. And our response is understanding white fragility. So what happens to us when we're faced with the idea that we are part of the problem? And how does that show up in our practice? And so, yeah, thank you for that. And I will turn it over to our students who.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Can't
Yep,
really
we
see
can hear
myself.
you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So this picture here is a painting that my sister created. And when I see that, I see cultural safety. My father was 64 years old when he passed away. That's my sister in the photo, who is also a nurse. And my dad did not want to die. He was scared of dying right to the end. But at the end, you know, he died the way he wanted to die, with all of us there. He died at home, and there was his dog was there, my baby was there. She was only 6 months old at the time. And so, but that, you know, it wasn't safe for him to get there. You know, he did not speak English well. And, you know, he had cancer, and it was too late by the time he went to seek help. And, my sister also painted this painting, I should say. Sorry, I have 7 sisters. I always get a little bit, I love them all, and I have a story about them all. But my last sister, she's the youngest, Buffy, and she painted this because she didn't ever want to forget the moments we were having with Dad at the end of life. And so when I see that, I'm sad, but I'm happy, because she did that, and we have that for life. And it really shows me that he died peacefully and that we were all there. So anyway, and I just want to share a quote from Julie. Actually heard this from a student. We attend university nursing programs, but we don't learn how to be leaders or provide care that is relevant for our own community. And I want to tie that back to death, which, I remember my first time nursing. I went to a small hospital, and I worked near my community, and we had a person from home that was passing away. And, one of my colleagues said, Dawn, can you just go see who's staying, who's going? They all can't stay. We had about 50 community members there that night. And I thought that was a ridiculous question. I knew they were all staying, and I was not going to ask anybody to leave. And I was really surprised by that, being in a hospital that always served our people. And I was the first Indigenous nurse there. And I actually had a lot of questions asked to me by my colleagues that really gave me an idea of the lack of knowledge that they had about our people. So I'm just going to go on to the next slide. And so we want to share some harmful practices that we all experienced in our nursing journeys. So Michelle and Christina and Julie will be sharing from their perspective, but I'm going to be sharing from the education perspective, racism and stereotyping. Lisa talked about this a little bit, those thoughts that you have going in, and, the students, the other students, even the professors, like you have these thoughts that you had before you came about Indigenous people. And then you have these ideas that were not academically prepared or fully committed to being in the school, with the lack of understanding of our past and our background. Like my dad, for example, my sister that's in the photo, she was a nurse working in that hospital, and he said, "Don't leave me." And he took 6 days to pass away. And she called work and said, "I'm not coming." So it's that understanding that we need to be at certain places. And we hear these comments. We are there for free. We hear it from, the classroom. You're here for free anyway. And the seats. You're here because of the seat. That's why you're here, without really acknowledging that we also achieved to be there, thinking that we got that seat because it's there for us. It's that we didn't meet the mark to be there. And the color blindness, Lisa talked about a little bit. And so also not knowing our cultural protocols or language. And in the classrooms, we're hearing about our people. We're hearing about that we are the sickest, poorest people in Canada. And I recall when I was a nursing student, I was, even about dying early. My dad was 64, and I never realized that till I started working, how much older everybody else was. But this is the image, or the thought you're putting in, is that we are the sickest, poorest people in Canada, and we are a burden to the system. And that's what I feel like the system, how it is now, and people are educated that we're a burden, and that needs to change. So, and the last part is we're called upon to teach. We're asked about, I remember I was asked to talk about our cultural practices one time, and I had told my professor that I cannot speak for that. I can only speak for the Mi'kmaq people and my people and what I only know. She was surprised that we were different all across Canada, and that shouldn't be. We should know, everybody should know who we all are, and we should all know each other, actually. So anyways, I'm going to pass it on to Michelle, I believe, is next.
Merci. Thank you, Dawn. The piece that I really wanted to touch base about was something that Dawn's talking about just there, about that recognition of that there are very distinct and varied peoples across Turtle Island, and that recognition is so important. I know when I was in university, both my undergrad and my graduate studies, I really felt invisible as a Métis person. It's this constant having to explain who Métis people are and why that is different from other Indigenous peoples. Having to really address some of those misconceptions that are really are currently held and consistent across all the different understandings of Métis, of who Métis people are. And sorry, I'm just noticing the slide. Can we go back one more? Thank you so much. Making the requests of my own cultural needs within school was very difficult. There's so many barriers in order to access, and on that constant having to explain why these needs are important to me and why they need to be met. So just having even those policies and practices in place to allow for individual cultural needs just aren't there at this point in time. I'm going to stop at that point now and pass over to my colleague, Christina, and then I will speak again to policy a little bit more in a moment. Thank you.
Hi. It is imperative that we maintain hope, even when the harshness of reality may suggest the opposite. That's a quote from Pablo Freire. And one thing I can tell you is, as a PhD student a couple years back, I recall reading this in Bell Hooks's book, Teaching Community, A Pedagogy of Hope. This quote made me laugh at first, and then I started crying. I couldn't stop crying. As I read for the first time about critical race theory, something that wasn't in my education. It wasn't part of the curriculum when I went to school in Southern Alberta, and it's not part of the curriculum or hasn't been part of the curriculum for many current practicing nurses and for many current practicing nurse educators. While there's a positive aspect, Bell Hooks says, of our culture that wants to look at racism and having it end, there's this paradoxical, heartfelt longing underlies the persistence of the false assumption that racism has ended, that this is not a white supremacist nation. Canada, the US, even globally, we can see the impact of colonization and racism on Indigenous health. It's not simply an Indigenous problem. And one thing that there is significant evidence for is that many nurses lack understanding of cultural safety and how to cultivate self-reflexivity, as Lisa was mentioning earlier. Cultural safety really starts with us, and it's defined by the people we serve. One doesn't have to operate with great malice to do great harm. The absence of empathy and understanding are sufficient. And so when we talk about our opportunity as educators, there's this pedagogy of discomfort. If we choose to embrace it, which is a bit of a privilege, then we will be uncomfortable when we start to practice and praxis our critical pedagogy, which is something that is limited oftentimes because we think we're doing really well. Nursing is benevolent. Nursing is caring. We have a caring science. We have all of these years of white benevolence, which is something that, if you've read the book, White Fragility by Robin DeMarco. If you've read the book White Fragility, the new book to read these days is White Benevolence, because it really does talk to how we cannot often see ourselves as racist or as part of the problem because we think that we're so caring and we're so much part of this lovely profession and discipline of nursing that we may not provide opportunities for ourselves and for our students to experience learning at a cellular level. What is anti-racism? What is cultural safety through critical pedagogy and being okay with being uncomfortable? I will pass over to Julie now to talk about some clinical examples. Thank you, Larissa Garson, as well, for the title of the book.
So when we're considering harmful or unsafe practices in the clinical setting, consider unexamined ideas of how race, whiteness, and privilege contribute to First Peoples' health disadvantages. And, we bring that image to learners in our cultural safety course about the steps or the things an Indigenous person has to overcome in order to access healthcare. So the image is like a woman and a child on one side of a line, and on the other side is a health clinician with a clipboard. But first, they have to overcome all the historical trauma. They have to overcome the effects of residential school, the distrust in the health system, and all those things. They're not going to want to get seen. They're not going to want to see a provider. They're going to want to self-manage at home. And that can cause more complications. And then finally, things become so bad that they made a decision that I'm going to put my need for safety aside to seek healthcare. And that person goes out, and once they make that decision, then they have to overcome the travel barrier. Like for us, our closest hospital is 45 minutes away, and it is not the preferred hospital of my people. We will travel further for care, especially for our children and youth. Parents make a 4-hour drive to ensure safe care. And that's a big problem. So once they overcome those things about travel and childcare, they arrive at their clinical interaction, and it's either going to be good or bad. That's how we see it. It's going to be a good experience, or it's going to be a bad experience. And most Indigenous people, I think, have had both experiences in the healthcare system, but it's the bad ones that stick with you. It's the bad ones that hold you from seeking care. It's the bad ones that cause distrust in the system. So those are all the things that the provider has to consider. Consider everything that person brought with them to get to that appointment, all those steps, all those hurdles they had to go through. And then a lot of times our people are dismissed. They're not heard. They feel like they didn't have a chance to talk. And we see that in our health data about repeat visits over and over for the same issues. And then if they're lucky, there's a 2-eyed seeing treatment planned or a follow-up after they see the provider. So I think that image of that long line of this is what we have to go to access healthcare, and a lot of it is a mental struggle. Maybe if our clinicians understood that, they would treat us better when we see them. And if there is a lack of understanding of those effects, they're not going to understand what that person went through. I was with some CCA students today. One of my friends from St. FX teaches a CCA program, and she asked me to come and talk to her students. And I said something in a way I never said it today, but we were talking about intergenerational trauma and epigenetics and some of the work from Dr. Amy Bombay. And it's about the cumulative psychological distress in generations. The more generations of residential school survivors in your family, the higher your psychological distress. And we were talking about unsafe healthcare experiences. And I said, let's think about it like epigenetics. It's in your DNA, that's blood memory. So a bad healthcare experience could be triggering like our ancestral trauma. People have to be treated with care and compassion. And finally, the last point, explore how they may be implicated within these systems. So I feel like my examples touched on all of these things. Thank you.
Julie, I just wanted to go back to that just for a second, because we're switching between healthcare and education, and we learn about living and being and how we are, our relationality in the world through our experiences growing up in education and in how we practice in the healthcare system. And so I just wondered if we could just take a minute, because I know, Julie, some of what you and Dawn have commented in the past, some of the strengths of your experience, your undergraduate experience, are quite, you've both commented on the nursing faculty and how that was a strength for you, that there was a core group that were supportive of you. Did you and Dawn want to make any comments about that?
I'd love to comment about that. My time at St. FX wasn't very nice for me. My dad passed away just a year before, like 6 months before I graduated from high school. I failed my first year. I was in the science program. I bombed it. And I saw the nursing program through my friends who were nurses. So I saw the rooms and I saw the building, and the Aboriginal Lounge was in the nursing building. So I was around it a lot. And basically I just walked into the director's office, knocked, and I said, hi. And I went in and just talked. And that open door was such a welcoming feeling. And just, I was treated with, dignity and respect during that conversation and given an opportunity. I didn't meet the criteria, I don't think, of nursing education, but imagine if they threw that in my face, I wouldn't even be here today. I failed chemistry, and that was I was supposed to pass. So just having that compassion, that understanding to get me in the program was a huge deal. And then to keep me in the program, that was also important. But there were, like Jane Mosley, she was one of the instructors who really, she always had her door open too. And I would just go in there and sit with her and talk, and just having a space in the nursing department, having somebody who understood. And another thing that she did, she never put me on the spot in the class. And I can't say that's true for everybody. I was put on the spot. Oh, Julie, Indigenous person, can you talk about this? She would say, is there anybody in the class who wants to talk about what they know about smudging or an example? And she would never put me on the spot. And I had a choice to say no. And, that was safe for me. That was a really good practice that she had. And I'm grateful for her and for a lot of the other staff there.
Thanks,
I could
Julie.
also share, Margot, if you like. I just want to, Julie's story of how she was there is similar to mine, which is the nursing director at St. FX. I just came back from Afghanistan. I was in the military previously, broken, did not know it, but a friend of mine worked as the Indigenous advisor who, at the time that center was in a nursing building. So I went, and she arranged a meeting for me to meet her, I think 7 days after I was home. And I walked in as me. I could tell you right now, I thought about this because I just graduated with my master's, and I cannot believe it, because this is the beginnings. I was in Afghanistan and I thought, oh my God, I didn't die. So I think I can go to school, because I was always scared to go to university. And so when I met her, she sat me down and we just talked. She asked me who I was. She asked me what I did. And, after speaking with me for an hour, she walked me to admissions and asked them to help me with my application. And that's where it started. And so, as I mentioned before, there was an Indigenous lounge that was for the whole campus in the nursing building. So we kind of moved in and took it over as nursing students. But I believe that was a part of what helped us all was whenever we had a gathering, but arranged by the Indigenous advisor, there was a certain amount or certain professors that came no matter what, every single time. There was only a few of them. And even if it didn't, it didn't matter what we were doing. Every single time they came, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, chat with us. And they were building a relationship. And I didn't realize it at the time. And one of them was Jane too, for me. And, she took me home. She made me supper. And I'm like, nobody would ever do that. Everybody seems so professional and they're not approachable. There's that power imbalance regardless. Once we leave our community, that power imbalance is everywhere we go. It's in a convenience store. It's every single place we go. And so another thing which she helped me with is, as I mentioned, I didn't know I was not well when I returned home, and I was struggling so bad. And everybody, to try, write, I'll help you write, or, go to the writing center with my papers and my exams. And Jane said, take a break, take time off. take that time, if you need it, take it. And I didn't even know that was possible or that could happen. There's those, we don't know how the academic environments work, and we don't know about, taking an LOA or leave of absence or anything. And if she hadn't done that for me, I wouldn't be where I am today. So she gave me the chance to leave and come back. And I ended up doing that 3 times, but I eventually graduated, and now, I have my master's. So it was her and a core group that really built those relationships of trust and understanding and empathy with us that probably kept me going anyway. So anyways, I'll stop there unless you want me to talk about anything else.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. Really helpful. Oh. I think we've covered some of these. We're catching up with our slides. We've done the talking. And so now we want to talk about achieving cultural safety in nursing education. Michelle and Christina have talked about some of the challenges, as have Julie and Dawn. And we've also just heard some about some of the strengths and some of the ways that we can create cultural safety in nursing education. So what does it mean for nurse educators to be culturally safe? Who determines if nursing education is culturally safe? And how do we avoid the cultural safety tokenism checkbox? So we've been called on to do this work, but how do we do it in a respectful way? Do people want to comment on some of that in the chat? Do you have some thoughts about where we begin with that? And then we're going to ask you to rate your knowledge of the framework, the CASN educational framework, to address the TRC calls to action that we've reviewed today. They're populating.
Just two comments on the chat in terms of recognizing our own blood memory and what we bring, and that is so important. And that's really the role of our elders. I mean, our allies, is to, when we're thinking about creating these culturally safe spaces, is to be able to, that's that hard work, right? That's that hard work in terms of creating that space for the truth to be told. And so that was, and then the other comment was, and then building on that was, one of the other comments was schools of nursing to collaborate. And so I would say it's even more than collaborate. I think it's partnership. What are the benefits for the community when we think about that? So I'm just responding, Margot, into the chat, a couple comments.
Thank you so much. That's great. Sorry, I'm having difficulty with my screen here. Oop. So there are 3 areas of the TRC or the CASN framework to address the TRC calls to action. The 3 areas are foundational strategies, recruitment and retention, and curriculum. And within the foundational strategies bucket, it's to address faculty and staff training, to create trauma-informed and welcoming environments in our nursing schools, to create partnerships with communities, and to adopt institutional respect in different ways. So there's different ways to create or to convey to communities that our institutions respect them. One way is through understanding the land acknowledgement, understanding the land where the school sits and where people come from who are attending the school. So there are various ways within these foundational strategies that our schools of nursing can work towards addressing the TRC calls to action. In terms of recruitment and retention, we need more Indigenous students, faculty, instructors, nurse mentors. All roles require Indigenous representation. We need designated seats, but also with those seats need to come specific supports. We've heard a little bit from Julie and Dawn about what those supports look like. They're going to talk in a moment also about other types of support. But we can't just create seats. We have to have the supports that go along with those seats. We also need verification of indigeneity. That's become an issue that people have self-identified fraudulently of being Indigenous and are taking seats or taking the benefits of those seats where they exist. This process needs to be led by communities, not universities or schools of nursing. The process of indigeneity needs to be established by the communities themselves. We also need outreach programs into communities and places where Indigenous people live to understand what is the best pathway into the nursing programs, special admission pathways, transition year programs, and distributed delivery where the program may be delivered within community. The third area is curriculum strategies. So where faculty seek out Indigenous support resources within the university. So for example, in our School of Nursing, we do not have an Indigenous or a nursing faculty who is Indigenous. We have a faculty member who is not a nurse and is Mi'kmaq, but no faculty in our School of Nursing are nurses and Indigenous. So in order to start to address some of these calls to action, we need to seek out where are those resources within our university. We need anti-racism, anti-Indigenous racism content, and skill-based training for faculty to be able to manage these difficult conversations within the classes when, as Dawn said, when conversations are raised about Indigenous people, some people, students may make a comment that are harmful to an Indigenous student. So faculty, clinical instructors need to be able to manage those conversations at the moment. We need clinical placements with appropriate Indigenous specific context evaluations. So if we have students going to Indigenous specific locations, community clinics, then the evaluations should be tailored to those clinics and what the expectations are for care in those clinics, not the evaluations that are for our Western-based systems. So the 6 chairs, there are 6 chairs across Canada, have worked with CASN to create the accreditation standard for accrediting schools of nursing in Canada. The standard says the curriculum implements Action 24 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to programs of nursing to integrate UNDRIP, human rights, the history of Indigenous peoples in Canada, Indigenous teachings and practice, intercultural competency. So this is the actual call, but we've just talked a bit about what that means in terms of safety and anti-racism. So all schools of nursing will be now accredited based on the extent to which they address this call. So again, we want to talk about or ask you to think about how you would rate your knowledge of implementing these components into your School of Nursing in relation to your local Indigenous people.
while they're doing that, Margot, I wonder if anyone online has a partnership with the local host nation where their school of nursing is located. I'd be curious to see if anyone actually has a formal partnership.
Mhm.
And I suspect, and that just shows the magnitude of work we have to do, right?
Mhm.
Because I
Exactly.
don't know of any either.
Mhm. Great, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for, I'm hoping this is helpful for you today to start thinking about it. That's why we're having this webinar. Okay. It seems there's a small group of people that feel they do have the knowledge to implement these components into their School of Nursing. So please feel free to share your ideas in the chat. We're really interested. This is what our work is sharing ideas, sharing knowledge. And so we're really interested to hear what others are doing that is successful in this work. So I'm going to pass it over to Christina, and she's going to share some more of the experiences that.
Thank you, Margot. So my husband works for worker safety compensation provincially. And one of the things that I'm always struck by, and of course we see it in the clinical setting, work safe, right? Our safety culture, everything from putting goggles beside the photocopy machine so that you don't get a stray staple in the eye, to being able to speak up and speak out when we see something that is a hazard. When we see something or we hear something that's a potential miss. Creating a safety culture really does flip things around. So instead of looking at cultural safety, which often puts culture first, and that is what historically I would suggest that a lot of nurses have held on to. It's like, oh, culture's fun, culture's a strength, culture is good, culture is beautiful, culture is, hands-on learning experience with local peoples. Safety, on the other hand, safety is different. And so unless we put the safety of our patients, our clients, our colleagues, our students first, we may continue with that paradoxical longing to end unsafe environments while also not critically engaging with the actions necessary. The calls to action are calls to action, not recommendations for that reason. So if we're able to shift our thinking to it starts with me, we can reframe from a student learning focus, as the original literature on cultural safety suggests, to raise up nursing students and midwives. Well, we need to take that into ourselves. What is our self-exploration, our own cultural humility, and our ongoing learning? It's a forever journey. There's no finish line. If we can look at cultural safety and sort of our dynamic engagement over time, it's forever, it's ongoing. And so looking at not blaming victims of historical processes for their current plights, looking at examining our own realities as nurses, as educators, and our own attitudes that we bring to each new person we encounter in practice, being open-minded and flexible in our attitudes, recognizing that sometimes there are subversive and all the time. We all have our internal unconscious bias, right? And to actually be reflecting and reflexive, where we're flexing that muscle of critically inquiring about our own self, it means that we shift that so that we're looking at how we ourselves are. There's a dual consciousness that oftentimes folks from historically excluded and structurally marginalized groups feel. It's called dual consciousness. You're aware of not only how you see yourself, but how everyone else sees you. And so if we, as nurses, and especially nurses of historically included groups, if you have the privileges, if you have intersections of privilege that you can identify within yourself, are you then able to become well-educated and self-aware and culturally safe to practice as defined by the people we serve? And I say that sort of as a challenge as well, recognizing in the chat some very important points that have been raised here before I hand off to Dawn, and that is upholding and respecting. Nikki Rose Hunter Porter says, Indigenous sovereignty, inherent rights, and shared decision-making governance structures in regard to Indigenous health and wellness. Nothing about us without us. And just thinking about, are you that whispering voice of reason that says something, that speaks up, that says something when you notice something, when you see something that's unsafe, or when you hear somebody telling you that they felt unsafe? What do? Where's the accountability? And so with that, I'll pass it over to Dawn for the next slide.
I am just going to add on to these experiences of cultural safe practices, and I'm going to bring it back to Jane again. Jane messaged me today, actually, and that's part of that relationship building. And I've still been in contact with that core group of nursing profs that I mentioned earlier. And so Jane knew that I had a relationship with Sister Veronica, which we had mentioned at the beginning, that she passed away. So Sister Veronica was from one of our Mi'kmaq communities, who was nursing for about 50 years, I think, maybe. She did some work in her community and some work with on diabetes. And so just that message alone, is that understanding of that relationship building. And I just want to talk a little bit more about Sister Veronica, just because I'm feeling emotional and I want to share, I guess. I met her when I was a nursing student, and of course, I only knew Julie and a couple other Mi'kmaq students, and we connected, all of us, the students, and we don't have role models or somebody to look up to or somebody to really guide us within our communities. And so she came back to the nursing convent when she was retired there in Antigonish, and I started to visit her. And I loved my visits with her so much. We spoke Mi'kmaq, we talked about how nursing has evolved from when she had started. And one of the things she mentioned to me was how she was involved in research a few years back. And this research talked about the racism experienced by Indigenous nurses in their education practice and their practice now. And, she was so proud to be a part of that group of researchers. And, something that she did not do when she was practicing, but she was included and brought into that research by other researchers, doing research on Indigenous nurses. And so when she found out I was doing my master, she was so proud and she wanted to know what research I was doing. And anyway, I stayed connected with her. And one of the things we'll talk about later is, some of the things we've done in Nova Scotia. And one of them was that I secured money to start a Mi'kmaq Nurses Showcase, which is, showcasing us with each other, being proud and celebrating Mi'kmaq nurses throughout Nova Scotia. And she was going to be one of my main features. And I went to see her a couple months ago, and she wasn't feeling well, and she had told me that she didn't have the energy for this, but said how proud she was and that she would love to be included in the magazine or in the showcase of Mi'kmaq nurses. So anyways, I'll move on to cultural safe practices. So I want to still talk about relationships, I guess. I had a nursing student that came to me and told me she was working in physio. So after surgery, where you go to rebuild your strength before you go home. And she said there was a bunch of all the clients there. She said there was one Indigenous client, and she had noticed like nobody went to go talk to her or see her about her exercises, doing her exercises. And so she asked her preceptor why. And the preceptor said, oh, she just never wants to do them, so I'm not going to bother. So she was really, she didn't know what to think of that. To her, it was, nobody had spent the time to build that relationship, to encourage this client to do the exercises and what was needed. And maybe the exercises could have been done in a way that she needed for herself. And it reminded me of when I was working at a hospital, and we had a client who wouldn't get up for anybody else. And so nobody took the time, and I went in there and I sat with her, and I was like, I found out so much about her family, her cat, where she worked, and just spending that time with her, I built that relationship, and she would get up for me. And I always thought about her, and she did end up passing. And that was one thing she said the day before she passed. She said, you know what? I really love when you come here because I know you're going to help me have my bath and help me get up. So that's what culturally safe practice looks like. Thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Julie. And sorry for the emotional part.
We like all those parts and all the emotions, Dawn. Thank you. So when we think about safety and practice for nurses in education, part of that is speaking up and out. So knowing how to intervene when you witness discrimination towards Indigenous people is essential for creating safe spaces. And I want to challenge this sentence. This requires seeing racism, because it's easy to say, I didn't see it. You have to feel it. You have to sense it. You can hear it. It doesn't just have to be something you see with your eyes. It's not always visible. Like you might not see it, but if your student tells you something or your client tells you something, it took a lot for them to tell you that. And you should take what they say as their honest experience. We can't tell a student, oh no, I think your situation was safe, so it was. Like, that is so wrong. So when somebody comes to you speaking up and speaking out, you have to honor that effort, protect that person. And in the midst of it, if you witness racism, if something is making you uncomfortable, follow your gut. I've heard so many stories about racism in nursing schools, in hospitals and clinical settings, and I'd never heard a story of anyone backing up anybody yet. The closest one I have is my sister was at the hospital. The nurse was treating her son very poorly. I was on the phone with the charge nurse, telling him that my sister's going to fight the nurse if you don't intervene. I'm home in Esk, it's only 45 minutes away. I can't help her. I'm watching all her kids. And I just finished my clinical placement. So I used my privilege and I told her, ask for Penny. She was the head nurse of the hospital. And when she did that, that nurse started to bawl her eyes out and apologize to my sister because she thought she had privilege and power after thinking she had none. So, you know, sometimes it's right in your face and sometimes you don't know. And then model in trauma-informed ways, because unsafe learning spaces leads to unsafe nurses. Because you have nurses learning that racism is part of nursing, which it is not. And then you have people who are not safe themselves, so they can't thrive. And, you know, it's not going to lead to the best outcome for that nurse and for their education. Trauma-informed practices socializes and inculcate students to practice in a culturally safe way. I just learned that word, inculcate, maybe like last year. And I told everybody about it because I liked it. It means to instill with persistent instruction. And in nursing, we do that. We instill our ethics, we instill our principles of infection control and so much more by persistent instruction. So with this, we have to carry on those same, you know, methods. You can't just do it once, check the box, and it's done. We really have to work hard. So I have some examples that I want to share just really quick about some of the things that my friends have experienced in nursing education. And I have their permission, their blessing to share this. They're so grateful that you're here listening, and that I'm here sharing it with you. The first example was in a classroom setting, and a student who was non-Indigenous said something very racist. And the instructor said nothing, ignored it. And the only Indigenous person in the class was my friend. They told me all they could do was sit there and try not to cry. So the instructor didn't speak up and out, didn't address it, ignored it. You know, that told everybody in the classroom those types of things are okay to say. That's so unacceptable. Another example, very similar, in the classroom, a racist comment is made by a non-Indigenous student. It was, why are Indigenous people so lazy? Why do they drink so much? And the instructor, who was a nurse, said, I don't know. That is not the right response. Very harmful to the students in the class. You know, my friend, she carries that with her forever, and she'll never forget how that classmate and how that nurse made her feel. And it's the responsibility of the educators to be the leaders in the classroom. And if you see somebody doing something wrong with a sterile field, you're going to jump down their throat. So I want that same enthusiasm when you see somebody slipping off of that cultural safe way. That's all I want to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. I wanted to touch a little bit on policy changes that we can make to create more safety within institutions for Indigenous students. If we reflect on the BCCNM standards of practice, include titled the Indigenous Cultural Safety, Cultural Humility, and Anti-Racism standards, they give us a really good example of ways we can create more of a safe environment for Indigenous students. Can you go over to the next slide, please? So there's 6 core concepts and principles that really focus on how we can reflect and change our own practice. So those 6 concepts are self-reflective practice. It starts with me. Building knowledge through education, anti-racist practice, taking action, creating safe healthcare experiences, person-led care, relational care, strengths-based and trauma-informed practice, looking below the surface. So you've heard some really fantastic examples from my colleagues on what this looks like in practice within the education system. When we're looking more at policies, this will kind of guide the way people interact and implement those safety policies in practice. And so some of the reflecting on these, some of the recommendations that have come up include ideas like permanent funding structures to support the leadership of Indigenous nurses within the institution, partnership policies to protect the integration of Indigenous knowledge holders within schools of nursing, the overall development of anti-Indigenous racism policies that address colonialism and intergenerational racism, And all of these, of course, are in development with Indigenous peoples. By creating those funding structures, they're already at every level within the institution and can help guide some of the creation of these policies. And another consideration that's really important is not only just the development, but making sure that everyone within the institution is aware of them. So often we will see, kind of a checklist is done and we check them off, but people aren't really aware of what they are and how to actually implement in a good way. And so we need to really establish that all employees within the schools of nursing are aware of them and regularly involved in reviewing and understanding the updates and changes that are made. I'm in the consciousness of time, and we're nearing the end of the session. I'm going to pass it over to Margot to summarize, and we're in a good way with Elder Ann.
Great, thank you. So I think a lot of incredible points and experiences and stories have been shared today with us, and I'm really grateful for everybody who stayed and for those who've shared, and for our participants who's also shared their perspectives in the chat. Thank you so much. And really, I think we realize that there's a lot of work to be done, that Indigenous people want to be the ones leading that work, informing that work, and creating this, and we need to be the ones creating those spaces within our schools of nursing to have Indigenous people leading that work. And so I really appreciate the chance to be here today. And I want to, the next part of our presentation was to give you some of the examples that we're working on, but I think we've had a lot of rich discussion today about what it is that we're doing. And so I'll ask Elder Ann now to bring us to a close.
Just before we go to Elder Ann, I just want to reiterate what we really shared. The majority of the work was all the harms that were created. What we really missed was highlighting the important initiatives that you are creating this space, Margot, over at your institution, and also the fact that we have just established the first Indigenous community-led graduate program in the country is taking place. And and it's not easy work. It is very hard work. And so I just encourage all of our participants to really think about that inward journey to acknowledging our own complicit roles in sustaining racism. So key questions we should all be asking ourselves as Indigenous, non-Indigenous, is how is white supremacy upheld in nursing education? And all we have to do is look at the literature to see the research, who's leading the research, and creating that space, and asking ourselves, how does white fragility show up in our everyday practice? So those, I just want to leave those really important 3 questions essential to engaging in this culturally safe journey, because there's no endpoint, right? And it's important work. So over to Ann.
So, well, maybe I'll just quickly, Lisa, I can say, because we were going to share some of that work that we're doing here in Nova Scotia. So as a non-Indigenous nurse working within this education system and in this area, it was really important that Indigenous nurses are leading this work, and that's where Dawn and Julie have been very active. And so just quickly, we have partnered with the Mi'kmaq Health and Wellness Organization and the Departments of Advanced Education, Health and Wellness, and Health Human Resources here in the province. And we have created the opportunity through funding that's been provided from the provincial departments to create an office of ULNU, which means Indigenous and Mi'kmaq nursing in the province. And so we're just getting that organized now. So there'll be a director of ULNU nursing who is Indigenous, as well as Indigenous nurse specialists who will be prepared at the master's level, who are Mi'kmaq or Indigenous to work with the schools of nursing to address these TRC calls to action that we've identified today. So we've been able to move this along here in Nova Scotia and are starting that work here across the province with the schools of nursing. So it might be helpful for people to see how those partnerships played out with Indigenous nurses leading that work. So Elder Ann, thank you for joining us again.
Yes, I'm running in between two meetings here, so it's very interesting this evening.
Of course.
You know, when we talk about culture safety, I'm not going to speak too long. My experience in my life and becoming a student myself and beginning to work in an institution that I had no idea that it was an institution, and to find out that, oh my gosh. Now, I have a thing with words because I don't speak the language. And when someone asked me one time to say a prayer, and I almost passed out because I said, oh my gosh, I don't speak the language, and they said, well, you know what? You have a heart. So listen to your heart and feel your heart and know how it is to speak the truth, because we hear old sayings, follow your heart and you'll never go wrong. It is so true. But we have to learn to listen also. And by taking those moments to be able to listen is what really, sometimes people think that we're not doing anything when we take a moment, but we're doing an incredible honor and celebrating who we are and, how we were created. And just years ago, my daughter is 43, so this was 43 years ago. I was in California, that's where she was born. And I had no money or anything, and I knew I had to get a job after she was born and try to get myself back to Canada. And now you're talking, in the 70s. So I was one of those flyby 70 flowers in my hair and, going around. And so I ended up signing up for this class, and it was a nursing assistant. So I jumped into it, and I had my class time learning how to take urine samples and doing the charts and changing the beds and moving people around. And this one client, this one lady that I had, she was a very elder lady, and she was blind. And I had to learn how to move her so I could change the bedding on the sheets because she couldn't get up at all. And I was with her for a couple of weeks, and then this one time I was doing that, and I was kind of like holding her, and she went and grabbed my hand. And I just kind of stopped, and she goes, "You're a Native person, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah. How did you know?" Like, because, I never told her. She goes, "I can tell by the way you handle me. There is such gentleness in the way you turn me around and the way you put my clothes on." She says, I can tell. She was a white person. She was a white woman. And well, that just touched my heart, and to realize as a human being, these instruments that we have, our hands and our fingers and our tongue, and they're so powerful that either we can lift somebody up and encourage them to be the best they can be, or else we can tear their heart out and spit it out. That's how powerful we really are. And so it made me really stop and realize, become aware of how it is to be kind. Because when somebody was kind to me in my days of frolicking around and not making very good decisions, and having to go through recovery and everything in my life, in my journey, that little act of kindness just empowered me so much to say, wow, you see that in me? You think that kindly, like, wow. And it helped for me to see that in myself, that that I might have a little bit of kindness inside of me, because I didn't believe that at all. But yeah, the culture safety, and I hear about the classrooms, things happen in the classrooms here. And it's sad to say, but the world does not know anything about us. They made it a point for us to be invisible. We became invisible in our journey. I became invisible in my journey. But that journey is beginning to change. So I guess not to be afraid when we hear comments sometimes, and they're not going to be easy to listen to, but to realize that it's just because they don't understand at all. They don't know. And unfortunately, if we don't speak up and say something, they'll not ever know. And that's that's my opinion of how I have to go through life, even today. So I'm very honored that a situation might come up and I may have to explain. I'm saying, I'm sorry. That's not exactly how it is, and begin the teaching that way. So I realize this is the end of your session, and I'm very honored and very proud of all of you to learn how to be who you are and to celebrate who we are, and to take care of ourselves, and how we need to walk softly with ourselves. I had heard an elder one time say, we need to decolonize our own minds. We need to decolonize our own minds because we were forced to live in a world that thinks like them, act like them, respond like them, be rude like them, and all that. And so now we need to decolonize ourselves. And I thought that was so powerful. I said, wow, thank you for reminding me that, and that's what I need to work on. So with this moment again, with all that you have heard tonight and all that you feel is so important. And we're just going to let it be for the moment. We don't need to react to it. We don't need to try to fix anything or change anything. Just for the moment, we're just going to be. So again, let's close our eyes and just take that moment to sit with Creator, the one who gives us our breath. This breath in and this breath out. And the reason why I say it every time I breathe is because it actually helps me to focus on my breath, which I don't focus on very much at all during the day because it gets so busy. But I have to honor my breath because it's the only thing that I have that keeps me alive. So when I take this breath in and feel it go through my whole physical being, and it releases, and I will release my shoulders, and everything that I don't need, it goes out with it. And then I take a new breath in. This breath out, release everything I don't need, and just sit and be the best that I can be. And if thoughts happen to come in again, and you realize you're thinking about something, put it on a cloud and let it drift off. You don't need it in this moment. This breath in and this breath out. And as we sit with the one who gave us our breath, so are we sitting with our ancestors. Our ancestors sat with the earth. They sat with the stars, the moon, the trees, the animals. And they knew how to listen. And they observed everything. And they learned how it lived. They learned how it spoke. They learned the language of the trees, of the medicine, of how everything worked together. They didn't change anything, but what they changed was the way they lived with it. And that's what's said in our prayers. Help me to learn the lessons in every leaf and rock. Because that's the only true harmony in a world, is nature. It's a huge diversity, and it all works together in harmony. So much we need to learn. So great one. Thank you for this day. Thank you for my brothers and sisters of spirit. Thank you for the teachers. Thank you for the students. Thank you for this opportunity to be the best that we can be of who you created us to be, and to carry on the seven sacred teachings of wellness, kindness, forgiveness, compassion, understanding, resilience, wisdom, courage. It all goes together. There's not one more important than the other, so that we may know peace. Thank you, O Great One, for this day. Thank you for this breath. Wilalian. You can open your eyes and bring yourself back into the moment. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful evening. Wilalio.
Hi, hi. And thank you so much for joining us.
I'm sorry, I have to sign out right now. I'm in another meeting. Yeah.
Want to stay and have a quick debrief, but I think, I don't know.
Thank you to our presenters and elders.